And we are live.
Hello,
Hello.
everybody.
I see Sable.
Hello.
Right? Sable's come to our own chat with her
Welcome
dancing
in.
bunnies.
Hope everyone's
Right?
been enjoying Conduit so far.
Yeah. How's everybody doing? What do we got in chat here? We got 6 people. We're not doing too bad. Okay.
And it's just,
Welcome to the Using Tabletop RPGs and Writing Fiction panel. All right. You were going to say something, Daz? Oh,
nope.
no, I've got to change all these things around because people changed their position.
That's why I didn't bother with those.
There.
So, shall we kick off while you do that with each other introducing themselves?
Yes, I was just about to say. All right, starting in the upper left-hand corner, we'll start with Daz. And can you please introduce yourself and what you're bringing to the table here?
Hello, my name is Dazzlinkat, and I have been Dungeon Master since, well, I'll just come out and say it, since 1988 is when I started playing much earlier, but I didn't actually become a real Dungeon Master until 1988. Been Dungeon Mastering ever since. And I'm also a writer. I'm working on 2 series currently, and yeah, that's what I bring.
Woo.
Excellent, excellent. And going across there to Rhea.
Yeah, so I am Rhea. I'm on Twitch as lrhea, twitch.tv/lrhea. And you can also find me on Discord in the TWN Discord. I am a writer and editor. I've been writing fantasy fiction for about 15 years now, and also, but I'm relatively new to TTRPGs. I've only been playing them for about 2 years now, but I see all of the benefits that they can bring to writing, and I'm here to proselytize. So that's me.
Excellent. And Games GM?
Hello. So, I would like to think everyone by now knows me. My name is Dan, pronounced Dan. It's quite a nice and easy one to remember. I'm one of the esteemed panelists on Erin's lovely show today. I'm getting to take a break from Dragon Command. So, hi over there in Dragon Command. I'm sure you're listening. Um, I am 28. I'm LGBTQ. I'm British. I would say I'm a self proclaimed geek. I'm an author, fantasy, sci fi writer. I'm also a speaker, and in my day-to-day life, I work in the legal arena as a chief legal officer. I have the esteemed pleasure to be a member of the World Anvil Streaming Corps and committee member for Writing CONduit. And it's an absolute pleasure to be here. I've been playing TTRPGs and try and say that 10 times faster after 4 hours sleep. Um, for about 10 years, and I absolutely love them. I've GM'd, I've played. I tend to GM more than I play. That's always the way I find as a GM. I'm sure everyone here would agree as well. But it's great, and I think what we're going to be looking at is how TTP RPGs in writing link with story and story with writing and vice versa. I think is going to be a real interesting panel, so stick with us.
Okay, and Bob.
And I am RPG Dinosaur Bob. The dinosaur is an important part of the name. I have been a dungeon master since 1977. 45 years. I got Erin beat by 2. He'll
Yep,
tell you that.
I've been DM since 79.
I will also add that in that time, I've only really started playing as a player in the last maybe 5 years. The first 40 years were almost exclusively dungeon mastering, and with the exception of maybe pulling a single adventure module or two, off the shelf, that 45 years has been in worlds of my own creation. The world that I am currently creating, Carterion, is the first one that I'm going to try to actually make a little money off of. So, so we'll see how that goes. Nothing is published yet. It's all still in development. I dipped my toe in the author sphere, in the non-RPG author sphere. In April, I have completed the first draft of a novel of it that what will hopefully be a 3-novel set, also set in my world of Carterion. So I definitely I come with very recent experience in trying to put together some creative fantasy fiction in a world, that was originally designed for an RPG, although I was the person who designed it.
Okay, and I'm Erin. All right, Erin Righ online. All right, and I come with 43 years of dungeon mastering, game mastering experience. All right, and I also do a lot of the developmental editing and consulting in the Toy Soldier Saga universe, which is Sable Aradia's universe. Right. We just published the first of the series of novels in that universe. Right. So it's called The Few Good Elves. Sable can put a link up. Thank you. And I also work on Sable's world, the Weird West. Right. Which also began as a tabletop RPG world. And I do streaming on this channel, writing. Yeah, that's it. Okay, let's jump right into this. What's that, Dave?
Erin, real quick question for you: Is the Dragon of Productivity going to yell at us in a minute and 50 seconds?
It was quietly.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, the dragon is there for those of you who are actually writing. This is a writers convention after all. So the break timer above me, right there, is for you guys.
And if you do get some writing done, feel free to share it. I know, for one,
Yeah.
I would love to see it, and I'm sure everyone here would love to see it. If you do need to share anything, Aaron, have you got link prohibition at all?
Nope. No link prohibition. Just throw your links in chat. Right. I've
Cool.
got moderators that'll kill you if you do anything bad.
Just remember, there's dragons here. We like you. You taste nice with ketchup. So I'm going to ask one question to Ria. Obviously, you are a very successful author, and I think you were completely modest when you introduced yourself. How, in your view, as you've just come to TTRPG, does that link with writing, and what are the overlaps? Because I know that's something I'd love to know. Sorry to steal the ground there, but that was something I wanted to find out.
Yeah, thank you. So I think, I went for a long time writing I'd never played TTRPGs. My most experience with just games and RPGs generally was like Skyrim. That was sort of the peak of it for me. And I was never super into like the more hardcore high fantasy elements. And then I got roped into a D&D group about 2 years ago and just started playing D&D. It was a little jarring at first because so much of it is rules based. There are so many like obscure rules, and having to like look up things in rule books was it was a completely different experience from what I thought it would be. I thought it was going to be a lot more like sort of in your head. But it was, as you start
You never
falling
gamed
back on
with
all of
me.
these. Oh yeah, and as you start falling back on all of these rules, I mean, and I'm thinking just things like rolling for things, right? You're like constantly, it's like, oh, I need to cross the lava, roll for a dexterity check, or can I see the glowing light up there? Roll for perception check. All these different things encourage you to think about the world in a lot more limited context, recognizing the limits of human beings or orcs or elves or whatever they are. They have perceptual limitations, and you're not writing just in terms of plot now. So when I was writing before, oftentimes I'd string characters from plot event to plot event, and that can work functionally for a story, but it lacks that rich depth of these characters feel like real people with limitations. When you start thinking about, oh, can they actually see that distance over there? Would they be able to hear this sound if they're on the other side of the city? Would they, like, all of these different limitations that get imposed? And that was something that D&D encouraged a lot more thinking on, and it also got me in thinking into things in terms of chance, where you're like the dice rolls end up being a lot more of those elements of chance where characters can succeed or fail just by the fates. It makes storytelling a lot richer, and it's more engaging.
Absolutely. Do you know what? I couldn't agree more. I think that's one thing that I've noticed in any of my writing, and I think sometimes that can hamper you in other ways as well, where in an RPG you will obviously be, well, the door's shut, you can't hear through that door. So obviously if one team are in front of the door and one team are behind, or some sort of trap has happened, in every TTRPG and every game group there's a level of meta, and I think as every GM, I know I do, and it's just my style. It doesn't mean it's the right style. I try and minimize that meta kind of gaming, and like you didn't hear that. You don't know there's a dragon on the side of that door.
Yeah,
So
I think that any
it's
good game master will discourage and actively discourage metagaming.
Yeah.
Definitely.
But you know what? At the same time, though, I mean, metagaming is a reality in gaming.
Mm-hmm.
All right, if your players have been playing D&D for a long time, they know what a troll is. They know what a dragon. They know how to fight a troll. Their characters
Mm-hmm.
may not have ever seen one before, but they know how to fight a troll.
Yeah.
All right. Now, yes, to have a good game, you need your players to say, okay, I'm going to forget that I know that, and I'm going to have to discover it somehow, and that's cool. But at the same time, sitting around the table, there's a tension that happens at the table when you describe that troll, and everybody at the table groans and, oh my god, we don't have any fire with us. What are we going to do? So and then you play the game. You can actually use that same kind of tension in creative writing if somehow you've introduced to that troll and the fact that he heals the chapter before, or someplace earlier, and it's almost the same thing. I mean, as a reader now, what the troll's going to do, or what's going to happen when they swing a sword at the troll. But you also know the players don't know, and now you get that same meta excitement, that meta angst, So it's actually something you could use. The application of dealing with meta in a game has applications in creating tension, I think, in your writing.
And just real quick for our sort of lesser, D&D apt audience, metagaming, of course, when players are playing the game like it's a game rather than playing through the lived experience of their characters. So, of course, in a game like D&D, you're supposed to role play and be the character rather than, knowing that you yourself are playing a character, and you can, you're not supposed to do necessarily the most strategic action all the time because your character wouldn't always know what's around the next corner to be able to do that. But
Yeah,
it's
it takes a
funny you
lot of
bring that in
skill to play a
because
7 intelligence.
absolutely, yeah, and it's funny you bring that in because I think a lot of times when we're writing, we do this kind of thing where we think we're almost like meta writing, right? We're like,
Mm-hmm.
we know that there's going to be a dragon coming around the edge. We know that our player or our character is going to have to face off against the dragon, and so we're thinking, oh well, I've got another 180 pages to go in this book. Obviously, they can't die here. But how do you make that tension real? And how do you do that in D&D when you know that you don't want to kill off all of your characters against a troll encounter? How do you
Not
create that real tension so that they don't feel like they can live through this, but also it's a little bit of a gamble.
I think
Definitely.
that leads into another aspect here. Again, as somebody who has been writing D&D adventures for a long time, you don't want to, you don't want to do what's called railroading in gaming, which is create basically one path that the party has no choice but to travel down. There's only one door in the room, and that sort of thing. You need in to make a good adventure for a game, you need to have a lot of choices for the players to make so that the players can take over the story. But you also need to have kind of planned, and by the way, any GM will tell you it is impossible to cover all the bases here. But you need to kind of anticipate, what three different things might the party do when they see this happen? The dragon came around the corner. What's going to happen? The character
I'm throwing poo at it.
Right. The character could run away. The character could take out its sword and try to fight the dragon, despite the fact that it's a silly fight. The character might try to talk to the dragon.
Or
All
throw
right.
poo
So
at
those
it.
are the three things that I'd come up with. And yes, in my parties, yes, one of them would start throwing poo at it instead.
There'd be no shortage.
Right. But as a writer, I can pick which one. Here's the beauty about writing. When you're used to having to do that, when you're used to having to figure out 3 or 4 potential outcomes for every situation, it makes it a little easier as a writer, I think, to figure out what to put in the situation and then decide which one you want. Because the beauty of being the author is I don't have to worry about which one the party picks. I get to pick. So but thinking like the party opens me up to a lot more options that I might not have thought about in the first place. My first thought might have been, the dragon comes around the corner and the character runs away.
Okay.
But what would happen? What would happen if the character tried to talk his way past the dragon? Do I want to explore that? Maybe I want to ultimately say, no, that's not going to work. He's going to just run away. But that was something that I might not have even thought of had I not been used to having to think like that. To build adventures, to build gaming adventures.
So then one of the advantages you're saying of DMing is that you get this perspective of all of these different kinds of people rather than, just being an author alone in a room by yourself writing, where you're constantly all of the characters and all of the characters are just making your choices that you have imported onto them. One of the advantages of DMing, if you get that, the glory of that experience, is you get to see different ways of thinking, other people making decisions that you wouldn't have made, and what kind of chaos can ensue on the story from that consequence. And of course, the consequence ultimately is also going to be up to the DM. When it comes to DMing and consequence, what do you guys like? Do you prefer to go in the air of, I'm going to make everything super, super harsh, or I'm going to make everything, do you try to make it constructive? How do you handle consequence?
I like to.
I think
Sorry, go
I was
ahead.
just going to say, I think Daz has an amazing point on this that you touched on during our initial secret meeting at the beginning.
Well, it's not quite, but I'll answer your question. When it comes to consequences, it all depends on what the consequences for. For instance, you only can prepare so much ahead of time, and so your players do something you did not prepare for. What do? You improv. I mean, a dungeon master truly has to improv because all of a sudden your players went sideways. You have nothing there, but you can't leave them sitting there while you think of something. So you just seat of your pants it, throw something out there, and then try to figure out how you can get them back on track without them feeling like you just guided them right back on track. And for consequences for actions, well, if you throw poo at a dragon, you're probably going to piss off the dragon. Maybe the dragon came around the corner.
Yes, but you might get it in its
by.
eyes, and then
Like I
it won't
said,
see you when you run.
You might also You might also just
Literally,
fluster the dragon so badly that you can run past him instead of away from him. You know, I mean,
Just use
It's a
Blather
very
and Skype,
civilized
run up
dragon.
to the dragon, say, "There's a big ogre out there," and run past him.
yeah.
But I think there's also a point that we've overlapped here as well with writing, where Rhea, you touched on the point with a writer sits in a room and obviously makes those decisions. And yes, there are one, two, three, four, five, six other players, or maybe even more than that if you're insane as a GM. But quite often, and maybe this is just me, but it's a bit like the old envelope trick. You give them three options, but they're all really the same option. Just one's got a brown envelope, one's a kind of brownish envelope, and one's a kind of burgundy brown envelope. And it's kind of the Houdini trick that you get them to pick the one you wanted in the first place.
See, I like to have natural consequences for people's actions in a game, right? Okay, as everybody knows, I'm a psychopath, right? Diagnosed, right? So I don't have emotional context like normal people do. I have to study social situations to see how I'm supposed to react in them, right? So I study how other people react in social situations, right? So natural consequences I'm pretty good with, right? If you do something that I feel would have this consequence, it's usually pretty accurate.
So
The way
what
the
kinds
way
of
the way I handle consequence personally, I don't like to see especially nowadays when it takes so much time and effort for a player to build a character and develop a backstory and get into the character. I don't like to see them dying for silly reasons or just because of a random dice roll.
No, me
All
neither.
right, when otherwise their actions were actually good.
Good, yeah.
So I will, if they're coming into an encounter that's going to be dangerous. I mean, this is not to say that I'll never kill a character. If they're going to go into a situation that's going to be dangerous, they will have warnings. They will get clues along the way to tell them that, hey, running away might it becomes a viable option here. Just don't rule it out. Think about it. I will never reward stupid, though.
Oh yeah,
All right,
I
you
will.
ignore my repeated warnings and die, you're dead.
That's how I reward
And I will
stupid.
reward really, really innovative thinking, even if the dice don't necessarily say I can.
Yeah.
If somebody comes up with a really, really brilliant way of getting past that dragon that I never could have imagined, they're going to succeed.
Mm-hmm.
If it's at all viable, they're gonna succeed, and that leaves them with a story to tell when that game session is over.
so that's kind of
Yeah.
like following the rule of cool, right? Like, I mean,
Yeah,
you're
yes.
exactly. That's
Yeah.
exactly what it is. Yes.
Yeah, it's the rule of cool. Right.
anytime something cool that can impact the story comes up, you give it that opportunity to unfold so that it can just and then people get to tell that story, right? And that's sort of the
Correct.
same thing that we want to do with our actual, like, we're not actual, but I mean that's the same thing we want to do with writing, where we have some kind of cool flowering event, some way of getting around a situation that we hadn't thought of before, and suddenly we now have a climax that's just sort of flowered and something that people want to tell other people about. So how do you think, I mean, is there a collaborative aspect to D&D then at coming up with that part of the story, or do you think that
Oh,
that's something? I mean, is there some kind of virtue of D&D that allows for that collaboration to make better stories,
I think
or
there is.
could a writer come up with that on their own?
If you have a table full of people that are interested in the role, you're going to hear me say this a lot sometimes too. If you have people that are interested in role playing, spelt ROLE, and not just ROLL playing, because there are gamers out there who just want to throw the dice and kill the monsters. Right? But if you've got a table full of people that get into the character and get into the story, then by all means, yeah, they're co-authors in the final event. And in fact, not only are they co-authors, but in some sense they're almost equal editors, because once they do something, I can't just say, even though I'm the DM, I can't just say, well, no, you didn't do that, you did this instead. All right, I mean, they did it, I'm stuck with it. Now I got to work around it. Taking that over to writing again, having that at the gaming table kind of defines again how a story gets told. It's my job as a GM is to set the scene. My job is to get all the scenery in place, get all of the actors lined up, and then throw the script away and go, guys.
Write a script,
and
read
we'll see
it,
how it
memorize
turns
it,
out.
throw it away, and improvise.
Once we're done with this scene, I'll figure out what the next one has to look like. If you're writing, you could try to envision that same kind of thing. Pick three. If you've played games before, pick 2 or 3 of your role-playing friends and ask yourself, well, if I set up this situation, what would they do? Not just what would I do, but what would they do? Ask them and pose. If you're stuck on how to resolve a scene, find some gaming friends and pose it as a gaming question, and see what they come up with. You don't have to take it. There, at least, you do have the option of saying, no, I don't like that solution, I'll do something else.
Yeah, I really like that. I mean, the idea of consulting other people, like gaming people, as sort of almost like a quasi-developmental advisor or something. I mean, where here's a situation. How would you get out of this in your character? And using that, because I think one of the things that I struggled with early on in writing was making characters that thought diversely. Not just that they were diverse, they came from different backgrounds and whatnot, but they didn't think as diversely because I made all of them. So they thought more or less in some version of how I thought. But when you start playing, RPGs with other people, you see like there's a lot of different ways of, oh, that guy thought that he could do backflips over the dragon, and oh, the DM let him. Of course, why not? And now you've got that cool scene to talk about. How do you? I mean, when you're
that guy in a game once, by the way.
How do you? I mean, when you're writing, how do you know? One thing that I struggled with is, I look at a scene and I don't necessarily know that I'm not giving it my full creativity. I don't necessarily know that I'm not thinking in the way that this character would think. How do you test to know that your character is, or your characters are acting in the way that they should be in a given scene versus in the way that you're sort of forcing them or railroading them to?
Okay, I got an answer for that question. All right. Since we're talking about using tabletop RPGs and writing fiction, right? When you get stuck on that situation, when you're writing and you're going, am I actually thinking diversely here? Am I thinking from my character's perspective? Go to one of your gaming friends and ask them. Right? Run it past them, run the whole scenario, right? Role play it with them. Right? If you're not the game master, go to your game master and have him or her role play it with you. Right?
And that's one thing that being a game master gives you a bonus, in that you have to be everyone and everything that is not a player. So they could run into rival thieves, rival character classes that are the same as them, but you have to be able to play every class, every monster, and you have to play them to certain degrees. So you have to have a whole mind full of characters when you're a dungeon master. You just pull one out when you need it, and they all have different personalities, different ways of behaving. So you're a walking multi-personality. That's what's inside you when you're dungeon mastering.
Yeah, and if you've been doing it for a long time, you have a pretty good repertoire, hopefully, of that.
And
how do you expand that repertoire?
Game,
yeah. Play different characters, play different ideas, right? Think about what you want to do when you're playing. Be a player, not a game master, right? That's how you expand the ideas.
One way to do it is make. another character. You know, if you need to make character sheets, you know, like you're going to play a game with the characters you want to run through your story. What are your main characters? Make character sheets. Give them dice. Look at their skills and
Oh yeah,
abilities. Set them
that's
up
the
to
other
whatever
thing.
level.
Yeah,
Yeah.
And all
we
you have to do is, okay, I want to do this. Now, what would this character do? I know how they have to do their abilities. What is in this character's wheelhouse that they can do if you want it that way? Well,
Yeah.
what would
I
this
think that's a
character?
really interesting point, that actually writers and synergy with writing fiction in the sense of, and a tool you can do. You could go to um, the Dungeons and Dragons, or print off a character sheet for any TTRPG. Create a character in a sense of, what are their stats? How intelligent is this person? Or likely, if they've got high intelligence, if we just take social norms, and obviously, you know, there's always exemptions to these rules, but if you're extremely intelligent, it's probably likely that your physical strength or other aspects like that may be lower. So how does that impact their um, deliverables? How does the character impact the core of your novel? And I think that ties again to a panel we had earlier, or a workshop with a moment ago, on how that character drives that core of the novel. And it's the same with TTRPG, and using that as a resource to be able to say, okay, well, I've got my main character, my and what we call non-player characters, NPCs in TTRPG. Those could be your characters in your game. You bring them to life. You maybe even be able to use Hero Forge or something similar to give them a visual look. How does that impact the story? How do their characteristics move that trajectory of your core essence of your story on?
speak for yourself,
I'm
though,
going to
Jim.
I'm going to add that if you don't take a few minutes to create a character sheet for your main character in your fantasy, then 10 minutes after you've published, somebody on Reddit will.
Yeah.
All right, and
Even if you do take the time to create a character sheet, somebody on Reddit will
yeah,
create one.
somebody well, I was going to say, and whether you've done it or not, once that first one is published, there's going to be a Reddit thread for about 10 days arguing over those stats. If you post yours, you say, no, this is the character, people will tell you you're wrong.
You sound like you're speaking from experience.
But this brings interest in the book, so it's not a bad thing, you know.
Well, they say there's no such thing as bad press.
Right.
And this leads to another thing that
I'm sure
I
there
do is I do character sheets for the bad guys, especially the big bad guy at the end, if you're going to have that kind of story. And your big bad guy is just like your players. They have traits, they have flaws, they have goals. And the big thing here is the goal of your bad guy. What does your big bad guy really, really, really want? What is he trying to do in the book? Or she, or they, you never know what it is. And what are the steps they have to take in order to get to their goal? Well, once you figure out all the different steps that your bad guy has to take, what their minions have to do in order to get this or that or the other thing, you have your plot line right there. All the beats of your main plot are right there, because your characters, your hero characters in your story, are now subject to stopping all these points along the way that your bad guy is trying to achieve to get to his big bad goal. There you just created your conflict, you created your plot line, and now all you have to do is figure out, well, how do your characters learn about these things that the bad guy is doing? You can have little tiny story arcs to get to, well, what happened? How did he figure out? How did your heroes find out about this first plot point that the bad guy is trying to do? Well, that's a little mini arc you write right there. And then what did they do about it? Is there a little twist to that? Well, now you just gave a twist to your bad guy, so you just plot that along, and you can do that really quick without even having to write anything. You can just work that out. Then you go back and write it through your character's view. How would your character do all this? Now that you got your path, boom, there you go.
So I think that leads
Yeah.
very naturally into a question
I just
that's sort
want
of
to
the flip
say,
side of that.
before we
Oh,
get
go
too
ahead,
far
sorry.
ahead, games, there is such a thing as bad press, the kind they used on the witches in Salem.
Oof. Oof, that, yeah. As the flip side of that initial question, you know, what sort of good things can TTRPGs bring in? I think there are also some limitations that are worth acknowledging in, especially, you know, a system like 5e, D&D. We've got things like strength modifiers and whatnot. And when you think of strength, it's typically in the real world a very fluid thing. It's, you know, you can be strong on one day and not so strong on another day. You can also have an adrenaline surge and maybe suddenly you can lift a car if your kid's under it. Like all of those sorts of things are very real and very fluid in the real world. But in D&D, your strength is set at, you know, 12, 15, 17, whatever it is. It's set at a number and you've got a strength modifier. It's +3 or -3. Or you know, whatever it is. And
As a dungeon master, you can handle that by a nat 20. There's your adrenaline surge.
okay, so you'd handle that still with the dice rolls.
Yes.
Well, you see, like I said, I play Science 2nd Edition mostly now, right? And how that would be handled in that game is that they have something called a feat of scale, right? Where characters can, if they're known for it and such things, actually make themselves tougher in certain areas, right? Like run at the speed of a fast car or whatever, right? If they're known for their speed, right? They can make a feat of scale that would make them run at, 100 miles an hour, right?
Oh.
And, but mostly only supernatural creatures can do feats of scale. Humans can't, right? They can't, there's no way that a human's ever going to outrun a Porsche, right?
But on the other hand, like you were saying, you know, that adrenaline surge.
Yeah.
You can, as a writer, you can just in your head say, well, you can't, you know, normally you can't do this, but hey, this character rolled a 20, they can do it. So as a writer, you can do it without actually having to actually roll the dice and get really lucky.
Yeah, I was going to add that the advantage a writer has is the writer doesn't have to roll the dice. The writer gets to place the dice with the number he wants sitting on top. All right, you can still use the game to inform your limits, you know, or to inform your probable limits. But the bottom line is, if you're telling a story and that story is better served by, you know, something spectacular happening that the dice couldn't possibly allow for, do it anyway. It's that you're telling an exciting story. All right, so you get that freedom in writing that you don't get as a game master.
I do believe there's a term for it. It's called poetic license.
Well, true. Yeah. A question to that. So most of us here are, and I think all of us have some TTP RPG experience. So you've got one resource out of everything that we know each. What would be the one resource you would pull on to start writing a fantasy or sci-fi novel tomorrow? What would you use? I think that's a really interesting question.
Like what game system?
What game resource?
Well, what resource would you perhaps
Book?
What book would you perhaps pull out? The stats. How would you use stats as your thing to? What would be the one thing you think would be a fundamental thing to help you make that novel better than anyone else's novel?
And I will tell you. I will tell you what I did in April. So, I did not reach for a player's handbook simply because I'm familiar with them enough that I kind of didn't need to. But what I did reach for was the bestiaries.
Yeah.
What kind of opponents? What kind of critters in the wild? What kind of nasty evil monsters? How strong are they? How strong should they be? what kind of abilities from the books do I want to include in my book? All right, and I don't have to use every little bit of it, but I use them as kind of a, the filling in the bad parts of the world that have to be, that people had to, that the characters have to get through to get to where they're going.
I do agree
That
on
was me.
that when it comes to the source books. As a dungeon master, once you know pretty much the rules and what you need, what you really need is a variety of enemies. You really need that. It is so vital. Not even if you're going to, not even so much to use it, but what will it inspire you to think of for villains and bad guys, and even just other people in the world. What will it inspire you to think of to add into your story that way
Well,
to
it's got to
flesh
be
it
that
out?
point of tension, hasn't it? There's got to be something that's causing tension.
Exactly.
Mine would be Wonder Draft or something similar, because I think as soon as you start drawing your world, as soon as you place where your mountains are, that changes the complete landscape of where it's going to be, in the sense of the clouds are going to be one side of that. You're probably going to have less water the other side of that due to the way mountains work, unless there's a factor in your story or mechanism or world that has changed that. And I think for me, that's one thing I would pull out when writing a novel is, okay, my world is setting this. Whereabouts my players playing? Where are they potentially going to visit? What are the settings they're going to work out? Picture that in my mind's eye and do some kind of general placing so that the world feels real. Otherwise, if it's okay, they've walked up a mountain, one side it was desert and the other side's desert. Okay, that's not necessarily a deal breaker, but it's uncommon. So why is that the case? Is this place a surge of evil? Has darkness consumed the land, or something else? Or is it a mirage? Is it a major illusion? And it is actually, you're in a dream. So I think there's so many avenues that you could use with that. So that's what I would take.
What would you say, since I mean, it sounds like everybody here has had a lot of experience DMing. I'm curious about your experience as a player in, versus DMing. What do you think that brings to your writing? Is there value to one experience that you would not have been able to bring to your writing had you not had it? Or, is one of them better? Does it bring more?
Sure, I don't think that one is better than the other, but I think they both bring different things. When you're a player in a game, you generally are in control of one character, so you can get into that character's head. Sometimes two, but usually one character, right? And you get into that character's head and you try and think like that character, right? You try and do the things like that character would do, right? When you're the game master, you have to get into the heads of everybody they interact with, right? From if they go up to the bartender and say, "Hey, barkeep, slam me a drink here," right? And the barkeep is, a gnome. He's got to think about, well, what does the gnome think of being ordered to give him a drink, right? The game master has to think of that. Then he has to think about what the barmaid thinks of the bully trying to bully the bartender around, and you know,
I
and
think that's such an interesting point, and it really links also to Conquest Publishing's point. Is I like the canvas method for writing. Stretch a canvas over your map, punch a hole in it, and focus where the light shines. To your point as well with the players, you do that. You control that player, and if you can control that player in the sense of you make that player real, and that's what a story is about. People want to. And this again is my opinion. I read a book to escape reality. And that's one reason why I read fiction over non-fiction. I do read non-fiction. I've read biographies and things like that. But the reason why I read fiction is to escape reality. So you want it to feel real. You don't want to just be somewhat lazy writing of which you sometimes see in films or not to talk ill of Doctor Who as a massive Doctor Who fan, but from the 80s, it's now kind of changed, and now the Doctor seems to have whatever she needs in her pocket, like magic. So I think that's a really interesting point, and I think that's the point with the player, remembering the consequences that, okay, you're in control of this, you've got to listen to the story, you've got to work out the clues. And I would say, and it links to a thought I've been listening to David Bulkaki's masterclass on mystery and thriller writing. And one of the things he said is the reason why he likes mystery and thriller writing is there is a problem solving element and consequences. You've got to go through it like a detective. Well, as a player, you're doing the exact same thing. You're going through a story, trying to pick up on the clues that the GM's given you that could be obscure or completely obvious. And I know I've missed the complete obvious before now. So it's really interesting.
Yeah, and as a player, you have the distinct advantage of being able to truly feel your character. You have invested all your time into this character, so it has really deep value to you. This is the only character you have, so your reactions are going to feel real because, oh my God, you put all this time and effort into it. You feel the depth. It's almost like you running around. Whereas a dungeon master, when you're being a dungeon master, you pretty much kind of get a little jaded. Yeah, my favorite evil guy is about to die, but he's supposed to die, that type of thing. So you kind of get immune to the feelings of death of your character. Whereas players, when their character is on the brink of death, oh my God, the emotions just come right out of you. All the reactions.
I've seen players burst into tears.
Yes.
Because their character died.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, on numerous occasions.
We said earlier that one advantage being a game master brings to an author is that it helps you develop that repertoire of other thinking. Mm-hmm. Being a player does the same thing, but instead of a broad, shallow repertoire, being a player lets you you won't develop as many as you do as a DM, but you'll get even deeper into that. How do I think like other? All right, by fully developing and actually living that character for a while in game, for session after session after session, you will start to learn how do I play a character that is nothing like me in person.
So it's funny you bring up, and I think Daz, you mentioned this, that as you as a DM, you've got like your bad guy and whatnot, and they're sort of meant to die. You create a lot of NPCs that you're not pouring all of your heart and soul into each one of them because or even maybe you are, but there's a certain detachment that comes with each one of them, as opposed to the player who's clearly emotionally attached to their characters. As a writer, though, I think the experience might be a little bit different. Typically when we craft a main character, we do pour a lot of our heart and soul into them. We do feel very deeply invested. So how does that parallel? What do you think in TTRPG DMing? What skill set do you think gets developed there or reinforced by that experience of, in writing, you've got the investment into your main characters. Do you think you're less attached to your main characters as a result of this? Do you think DMing has given you more of an appreciation for what the player is going through? How does that connect?
I think in my case, when I'm writing, I become very deeply invested into my main character. Way more than I do when I make characters for the game. Because when you're a dungeon master, you're the dungeon master. You don't get very many opportunities to be the player. So, but when you write, you are finally a player. Sure, you got to take your player through the plot that you wrote, and so you know what's going to happen. But on the other side of that, you know this is your chance to be that player, and all of a sudden you know what's going to happen, and so it kind of hits you because this is your chance to be that player, to really feel your character, to really be in character, but you kind of know what's ahead, so there, you can feel even more dread as you write, type of thing, or more elation. Hey, I know this is going to happen, but no, you know, and
Okay.
you can really feel bad if you plan to kill off your character.
Okay, guys, we gotta take a break.
Okay.
All right. We were over the 45-minute mark.
All right.
All right. So
So
finish
we
your
will
point
be
there,
back.
Daz, and you can finish your point, and then we'll take a
I'll
break.
just pick it up when we get back.
Okay. Okay, so we will be back in 10, 15 minutes, something like that. All right.
Okay.
However long people need to go for, maybe 5 minutes. I don't know. All right.
So,
Timers. And we are back. All right.
hello.
We're going to
Yay.
hand the microphone back to Dazzlinkat so that she can carry on her
Discussion of the DM desperately getting to be a player, but only in a novel.
Yeah. Okay, go ahead.
Well, that's pretty much what it feels like. Because this is where I get to dive in deeply, and it's not a character that is always meant to die. Sometimes I don't know. Will I kill my character off here because they're getting into some place, and will I have another one take over, and then I decide, no, I got to keep it going for this one, or this one has to die. And then I can really feel it, because that's the player, the part of me that really wants to be a player comes out in my novel writing. Did that answer your question, Rhea?
Yeah, I think it did. So I think in that vein, one of the things that I often think about is, when I'm playing D&D or something like that, you often can break limbs in real life, and it's a lot harder to break a limb in D&D. Maybe it isn't in the way you guys DM, but I think generally combat goes in terms of like damage and things like that. They don't necessarily carry long-term implications of now, 15 years later, because you fought that dragon, the sinews in your leg are actually still kind of not there, and you've got leg damage, you've got a limp for the rest of your life. So how do you guys balance
I used to be
that?
an adventurer until I took an arrow in the knee. Yeah.
Exactly.
There is sort of a balance to that. It's when you're a dungeon master, you want there to be consequences to dire injuries, and it's simply if like in 5e, the character gets to 0 and they start making death rolls. Once a character gets to do that, at least in my rules, I'm very strict about it. They have some kind of serious injury, even if they get magically healed, it's not going to be perfectly healed. They're going to have some kind of scar. Maybe they'll have a limp, something like that. But it's gonna have an effect.
See how I handle that.
It depends on the game system too.
Yeah.
D&D explicitly doesn't. You're right. Talk about like losing the use of a limb or having a broken bone or something. Historically, they tried to long ago. And what they found was players just got so hung up on these called specific shots that it really bogged down combat. So the D&D people just said, nah, no, forget all of that. You swing your sword, you hit, you don't hit. If you do a critical hit just means you do more damage. But there are other game systems where a critical hit does require a specific outcome, like Twilight 2000. The bullet hit you, but it was a critical hit. Now you roll another dice, and you've now lost the use of one arm.
And pray it's low.
Or it struck a major artery, and you're bleeding out. If you will bleed out in a round if you don't get medical help immediately. Or so different game systems do approach that differently.
Yeah, how I approach it is in my Pathfinder game, which I do online in the Toy Soldier Saga universe. Daz is a player, right?
Mm-hmm.
So is Bob, all right? And how I do it is
Well, I feel
Paizo.
left out now.
Well, Paizo put out a couple of programs, a couple of apps for your phone called iCrit and iFumble. Right, just ICRIT and iFumble. Right, and when you roll a critical hit, you just push a button on your phone and it tells you what the critical hit did, and
And is that
whether
app on Android, OS?
Android, yeah, I think it's available on OS too.
Okay,
Right,
and
but
that
it's
was
available on Android.
Sorry, say that again.
iCrit
iCrit. Ooh.
and iFumble.
And you generally find when you roll the dice in those apps or push the button, it's you feel that they're very diverse. They're very diverse outcomes, or is
Oh
it
yeah,
generally
yeah.
like
There's about I think it's 56 different outcomes that can come from each different type of weapon: slashing, piercing, bludgeoning, and magic.
oh, that's very useful.
Right,
That's a great writing tool.
right.
I've just
So,
popped those in chat. If anyone wants them.
and then they've got melee, ranged, natural, and magic for fumbles.
Wow.
Right. So
Why have I not heard of this app before now? That would have made my life a lot easier.
I was going to add that I've been using Foundry VTT as my virtual tabletop platform,
Yep.
and somebody in the development community for Foundry has actually built, or I should say, in the Pathfinder development community for Foundry, has actually built a critical fumble and critical hit table
Yeah.
that you can actually integrate right into your player roles.
Yeah.
So similar thing, but literally the player pushes one button and it comes up and says, "This was a critical hit. You did this much damage, and this happened."
Yeah, it's
And
the same
it
thing. It comes
happens all in
from
one shot. Yeah.
it comes from the Paizo critical hit deck.
Okay.
So
yeah.
how do we tie that back to writing fiction? So what?
Yeah, actually, that was sort of a question that I was thinking along in that vein is, when you're thinking of writing with a TTRPG as some sort of writing aid, how do you know which one to choose? Because there's so many out there, and they all have very different tones. D&D is very heroes doing heroic things, as I've heard from many GMs. But also there's like darker ones like Shadowrun. There's of course Scion. How do you, when you're going through what kind of tone of story you want to tell, that system is going to inform a lot if you're going to rely on it as some kind of storytelling device. How do you know which one to choose? Is there a resource?
You probably want to start by matching the system to your genre.
Yeah. You see, like you've got Shadowrun, which is obviously cyberpunk, right? And then you've got Twilight 2000, which is military punk, right? Apocalypse punk.
Post-apocalyptic military punk, yeah.
Yeah. Right. And so yeah. Right. And have you tried Twilight 2020, by the way?
No.
You should. It's rewritten. Right.
Yeah, but I mean, like,
Same game
Dungeons and
system, but
Dragons and
different.
Pathfinder, the plain vanilla versions of those, if you're writing, epic heroic fantasy, they're fine. If you're writing vampires and werewolves, and all you really know is D&D, I would suggest you pick up the Ravenloft materials, because they include some modifiers.
Yeah.
Ravenloft
or the Curse of Strahd module, for example.
The new Curse of Strahd, yeah.
To get extra bits.
If you're looking for future, Pathfinder, Paizo has, Starfinder?
Yeah.
For a futuristic one.
For sci-fi games.
Yeah.
And there's other ones like Traveler, and if you're
Traveler is a wonderful game that never took off as much as it should. First of all, how can you not love a game where you can die during character generation?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And don't forget Cthulhu. Cthulhu is where you can get a lot of the deep horror. You can do a lot with Cthulhu.
Yeah, I've got. I backed a Kickstarter for something called Masks of the Mythos, which is the Cthulhu mythos in the Scion universe. Right. So the Cthulhu gods alongside the Greek gods and Norse gods and the yeah, right.
So which one are there any games that you find are better for helping as like a writing tool than they are as actual games? Or do you find the ones that are the best games are also the best writing aids?
Yes. Yes, I've done.
I would say your first bet is if you've played only a couple of games, pick one that you know.
Yeah.
Unless you're prepared to, unless you consider part of your preparation for writing to be spending days, weeks, months learning how to play a new game, then don't do that. You know?
I
And
mean,
I think
you
that's an
can.
amazing point, because really, shouldn't your novel be able to be turned into a game? And I think that's a really important thing, in the
Well, yeah,
sense that
that's
when
exactly
building it
what,
out.
Well, that's kind of sort of what I'm doing. I'm doing
and that's
both
what
at
I'm
the same
doing too.
time.
What
But
I'm doing is,
not all novels are meant to be played as a game, because not all novels are basically a game is action centric. There's something, there's something very actiony centric, and
it
by
has to be.
action it means the characters are severely interacting with other things to a point where it's more action than deep character build on the inside. It's not all internal so much as it's external influences of all different kinds, but there can be internal influence as well. But you would have to come up with a different type of role playing where it would be all mental gymnastics. I mean, there are games out there like that.
Yeah, Cyan.
Yeah, and then don't forget Vampire the Masquerade.
Yeah.
Uh, so what was
Cyan
it?
is originally made by the guys who made Vampire Masquerade White Wolf Games.
Yeah.
And Onyx Path bought all the old original White Wolf stuff and the original Cyan stuff, and they made the 5th edition of all the original White Wolf stuff, the original World of Darkness,
Mm-hmm.
right? And corrected a lot of the errors in the books and stuff like that, right? And they made a 2nd edition of Cyan, right? So
one of the things that I see as sort of a theme is, we, and I think especially for all you GMs here, have a lot of experience with a lot of different games and different systems. You're clearly very invested in the TTRPG realm, and that is, I think it has a higher barrier of entry than a lot of people assume at first. Like it can be very hard to get into D&D and learn all the rules and find a good group of people. Like there's a lot of obstacles where things can go wrong, and people find a lot of the writers that I talk to who aren't playing TTRPGs, but maybe they are writing sci-fi or fantasy. They look at a game like D&D, they think it's very complicated, and they don't want to, it's too much work to be worth it. What would you say, first of all, to how they can make it less work, what's the best way to get into them? And second,
get a good
why
GM.
is it worth it?
Get a good GM. That's
Finding
the thing.
finding a GM who will be happy to guide you.
Mm-hmm.
Not if you find one who feels like, yeah, I can make time for you, I'll help you. If they don't sound enthusiastic about helping you get started, they are not the GM for you to get started with.
Yep. Find a good GM. That's the big thing.
Yeah, one thing to remember is like the player's handbook, it might be 300 pages long, but that's because it's describing 12 different races and 12 different classes, and every ability that those players are going to be able to master between the time they start the campaign and the time they become demigods at level 20. All right. If you're just starting out, the stuff you need to know is probably a page and a half.
Yeah, right in the
All right,
very start, which tells you about dice rolling and
because you're level 1. I mean, the rules are actually pretty easy. You learn the game as you play the game. You'll get and when you get introduced to a new situation, yes, you need a game master that will, that'll help teach you through, the new situations. but the upfront work with a little guidance, with somebody to reassure you and point out that you don't need to read that 40 pages. You only need to read the first two, and stop. It becomes a lot easier, I think, to deal with.
Yeah.
And then as your character grows, you read pages 3 and 4, and then 5, 6, and 7, and then.
So don't take it all at once then. You'd say take it slow.
Sure.
Find first step
Yeah.
one is get a
Sure,
good
it's a bloody
GM.
elephant. If you're gonna eat it one bite at a time.
To be honest, it actually makes for a better player experience. When I pick up a new game as a player, I will not read past the opening abilities of the player. All right, because I don't want to walk into a game, a game that I've never played before with meta knowledge. I don't want to know where I don't want to know where I'm supposed to end up 10 sessions from now. All I want to know is, what do I got now? And how do I deal with what I can do now? And as I do that, that'll help hopefully inform me once I start seeing my choices as I advance. I can say, well, I've been doing this, and this kind of is a follow-on to that, so this is how I'm going to specialize. And I try to grow my own characters as I, as blindly as possible when it comes to what the future rules would allow.
Would you say it's the goal of every writer player of TTRPGs, every player who is also a writer, to eventually become a GM? Or do you think that the experience of being a player is enough to inform, to help inform your writing?
I would say that would depend on where you feel your writing needs enhancement. If you are if your problem is character and getting into character, being a player is the number one way to do that. What if your problem is plotting? Well, the number one role of a dungeon master is to come up with some kind of basically plot, which is the list of encounters that can happen. That's basically a plot, no matter how you twist it. And then you have to make the encounters make sense for why they're happening. That's the plot. So if that's what you need, you can start learning that way. But what if you need something else? You need to learn how to flesh out a world. Well, that also comes with a writer needs that, and that also comes with dungeon mastering, because you need to flesh out your adventures. So where is it in the writing that a writer feels they need? If they really need to get into character and they have troubles with that, definitely only a player is really good, because it allows you to do a deep exploration of a character and explore their abilities, not just them as a personality, but what they can do and how they would feel doing it, that type of thing. But if you need more of the how the setting feel, the world building, the plot making, that would get you into the dungeon master territory.
So in the final 10 minutes, what do you think each of us are our top tips for TTRPG and writing fiction?
Okay. I think my top tip for TTRPGs and writing fiction is try not to get hung up on the rules of the TTRPG, right? In so much as the mechanics. You don't need them so much as you need the role-playing experiences of the TTRPG, right? When you're writing it, try not to think about, well, he rolled a natural 20, or he rolled a 1, or he rolled a 17 and hit, right? Think of it more like, he thrust his sword hard to his left to parry the axe as it came in, and arced it around to cut through his abdomen, right? You got, and that's a little bit more detail than we put into a role-playing game fight, right?
So Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
If you find yourself, if you are an author that's not familiar with RPGs, and your first thought is, I don't want to do that, it's silly, I don't want to even think about it. I would suggest you treat it as if it is part of the mandate of the research you need to do for the book you're doing. All right. With luck, you will discover that it is fun research. I'm going to go research sand, different kinds of sand. Well, that's a pretty sucky kind of assignment. But if all of a sudden I need to go I need to go research the kind of sand found on Hawaiian beaches. Now there's side benefits to this. You might just find yourself having fun. You might find yourself learning a little more about your own creative abilities that you weren't aware of. But if you have to treat it as like I said, treat it as research at first, at least to get into it. If it doesn't fly, if it's not for you, it's not for you. But don't knock it out of hand until you've tried it.
I think that's an absolutely amazing point, and I think for me, it's echoing everything that everyone said, and particularly what we picked up during our kind of secret meeting during the break and at the beginning, is when you're writing, quite often you as the writer can get stuck between, how do I get my character from A to B? How do I get them? I want this outcome. How do I get there? And you're conscious of obviously overwriting, conscious of being succinct, all this kind of thing. And sometimes you can just get A-B. Obviously, not always the case. But with TTRPGing, it's a really good tool where you can actually use it to say, okay, if a roll 1 happened to this person in the book, i.e. the worst possible outcome, what would happen to my story? Where would they go? What would they do? Or they rolled a 20, i.e. the maximum, and it's the best possible result you could ever get. What would happen? Would they just kill the dragon? Would they be able... How would that augment your story? And I think it's an interesting narrative to build as part of your drafting, as part of your research, as Bob has highlighted, to kind of say, well, how do I, as a writer, ensure linearity of the story and real world consequence? And I think that's my 50 pence. And I was going to chuck that in just before I go and jump and leave you all, because I'm going to go and go the closing ceremony.
All right, Games.
I'll
Good
leave you
having
all
you here,
soon.
buddy.
Thank you for having me, Erin. It's always a pleasure. And thanks for all my panelists. And I will leave you all with these guys. You've got a lot more time yet and a lot more info coming.
Okay, now I will move these around.
Actually, we don't have that much more time, do we? No.
Yeah, 5 minutes, I think. There was one thing I wanted to quickly sort of tack on there, and you both have pretty much everybody's mentioned it here, but the using those dice rolls. I mean, I think we've discussed sort of using dice rolls as a way of like adding chance to a story, but I think one thing that's really important is having a creative mindset while you're doing it. And of course, Daz, you also mentioned this, and I think when it comes to GMing games and whatnot, when you get those ones, or you get you have to determine what the dice outcome actually amounts to. Maybe whether the player succeeds or fails because it's a dex save of 15, player rolls a 14, so you know that they failed the save. But at the same time, now as the GM, you have to engage in some creative thinking about what does it mean that they failed the save. Do they just slip off the cliff and they fall to their death in the lava, or do they get another chance? Do they slip off the cliff and there's also a rope vine that they can try to dangle on for a moment? That's going to be another dex save. And
that's a really good point you make, because that is what we do. But you're not really out to, oh no, they failed to save, boom, they're dead. It's always come up with that, what else? And you have to do it on the fly. You just boom, well, yep, there's a vine. Whoop, there's a ledge, grab that.
Yep.
And that's the same thing that happens in writing. I mean, sometimes we don't want our characters to always be succeeding. We don't want them to be Mary Sue's. We also don't want them to be, well, maybe we do want them to always be failing. That could be funny. But we definitely want there to be some kind of creative consequence to their actions, and that's the story. The story is the creative consequences that we come up with for our characters doing their shenanigans. And so when you're rolling dice, if you choose to roll dice as a way to decide your next plot event in a story, be creative about it. Creative about the consequences. Make sure that you know what it takes for them to succeed and fail. And also, when they fail, come up with a fun way, a way that's more engaging for you as a writer when you're thinking of these different situations, to move the story along. Maybe it does set them back, but how does it set that character back? Is it going to be a giant setback? Is it going to be just a minor setback? Do they slip a little bit, they catch a ledge, they can get back up? Or is it they fall into the lava and now you've got to find a way to make sure that they don't get too burned as they try to swim their way back?
Yeah, and I would add on to that, don't forget, the bad guys get dice rolls too. What happens if a bad guy rolls a 20 or the bad guy rolls a 1?
Yeah, you see, that's what I like about the Scion system, actually. Right? They got two pools that the characters do. They start off with a few dice in them. One's called the momentum pool, and that's for the characters. And every time they fail, it adds dice to the momentum pool, right? Which they can then pull out for later actions, right? To add enhancements to their rolls, right? But every time they pull out uh, momentum, it adds to the tension pool. And the tension pool is the same thing, but it works for the bad guys.
Very nice.
Right? So the more that you do, the more tension builds up and the bad guys do better. Right? You know, some
Yeah.
special abilities that bad guys have require them to spend from the tension pool. Right? And they can do special effects. Right?
Star Wars has a the Star Wars role playing game has a mechanic that that lets the player or the referee, there's a pool of force points, and they start off with, there's so many, the pool has so many white light forces, a good force and dark force, and as long as you haven't drained your pool, you as a player can draw on the light force to enhance your next dice roll. It'll give you more dice or better or bigger dice. You'll get a D12 instead of a D10, and you still only need the same outcome, that sort of thing. Certain situations there's sometimes where you can, again, you spend a force point to maybe make a roll that might be very difficult a little bit easier. But you have a limited amount of these. You can't do it forever, because once your pool gets down to 0, and every time you take one out of your pool, it goes into the other pool.
There's a flow.
So yeah, exactly. The force is balanced, but it flows from the light to the dark. So you got to be careful. You can't just go into the first fight and suck down all your light force points, because now you're spending the rest of the night with the DM saying ha 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 ha. Because whenever the DM wants to do something to the bad guy rolls, he uses a dark side force. He uses the other direction. So
Saga?
but
That's genius.
he carried away either, because then he's giving all the points back to you.
Is this the Star Wars Saga edition?
This is the Star Wars. Specifically, it is the ones that were published by. Oh, who the hell is this? There's been like 3 different rule sets for Star Wars.
4, I think.
This is the more recent one.
Yeah.
You gotta love people that don't put a publisher page in their book. You think a book this big
Let me see the cover of that one.
would have a title page at the beginning? Who the hell is the author to the... I'm trying to remember the name of the company.
Yeah. Actually, I like the old West End Games D6 version of Star Wars. All right.
Okay, this one is a dice pool, a dice pool version.
Yeah.
It uses lots of weird. Oh, here we go. I found the credit page.
Yay.
The credit page is 7 pages into the book. Fantasy Flight Games.
Fantasy Flight. Yeah.
Yeah. Which I think by the way, they just sold it to somebody who was actually going, which is good because the Fantasy Flight looked like they were going to fold, and everybody was upset that the game system was going to die.
I do
But
believe
they
we
sold
are.
somebody
we
who
are
promised to keep it going as it is. So
Okay, we
I
are
do
done.
Yeah, we have to go. We're like
Yeah,
2
we have
minutes
to go.
over.
We're 2 minutes over, guys.
right,
Okay,
and
so
the closing ceremonies are happening, right?
right, so we
Yeah.
are done. Thanks everybody for coming.
Bye. Thanks for listening to us.
Bye,
Yeah.
everybody.
Everybody. All right. Thanks for being here. And we're gonna raid the ceremonies.